Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. You may not know this, but the first video that I did for YouTube was a book review of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And if you have seen that very strange and very awkward video, you may remember that I told you that Joseph Conrad is for me a kind of muse. He's like a literary patron saint, and I actually have a picture of him right there in my writing desk. So from that time, from the moment that I did that video, basically I had been meaning to come back to his work and share some ideas on it with you. But you know how it is. The months kept passing and the years kept passing, and other books were more of a priority to me, and those basically got in the way until now. So here's the thing. Here in the US at least, if you go to a bookstore, there are 3 books by Conrad that you are sure to find. If you need a copy of one of these, you can basically just go to the place, and 99% of the time you will be able to buy a copy. One of them is of course the novella Heart of Darkness. The other one is Lord Jim. And the third one is the one that we are going to look at today, which is of course Nostromo. Now, Heart of Darkness is the novella with which Joseph Conrad basically secured a place for himself in the literary canon. It is assigned in many college courses. I know that it was assigned to me in one of the courses that I took. Sometimes it is even part of the high school reading list. So you can see how important it is considered to be. It was my doorway into the literary world of Joseph Conrad, but I kept hearing from critics and from people also, just the general public, that Conrad's masterpiece was actually Nostromo. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to read it. The other reason was that, as you may know, I was born in Latin America, so I really wanted to see how Conrad approached this region, its history, its peoples, and its cultures. So in his foreword to Nostromo, because this one comes with an author's note, Conrad tells us that the story is based on an anecdote that he heard as a young man when he was working in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, something that we have to say here is this. We don't really know for sure whether Conrad visited Latin America. This is an open question. But even if he did, he was there for a very short time. Not enough time, basically, to give him the whole idea for an entire book. Nostromo is a book that is not based so much on lived experience as it is based on reading. That's another story that is very complex, and we're not going to go into too much detail with that, but I did want to mention that very important point. So here's the anecdote. Apparently, a man took advantage of a revolution to escape with a lighter full of silver. Now, a lighter, if you're not familiar with nautical terms, as I am not, I had to look this up, is a flat-bottomed barge. So apparently this man just took advantage of all the turmoil, and he was able to escape with all this silver. And this is basically the main idea that gave birth to this novel in Conrad's imagination. He was like Henry James in that sense. He had the ability to develop entire stories based on a real life anecdote. And as you may know, Lord Jim, the genesis of Lord Jim, is very similar to that, because that other novel is based on a remark that Conrad heard about a man that was just passing by. So we are talking about a very imaginative author right here. And I think that's one of the things that actually draws me to the work of Joseph Conrad. Let me tell you a little bit about the edition that I have. I was very happy to be able to buy this particular edition. I am a big fan of the modern library. And when you look at this one, it's hardcover. And the novel takes up just about 630 pages. But because of the font and the amount or the part of the pages that are covered, if you're looking at an ordinary or a more common edition, probably you're looking at 480 pages, 500 pages. That is the length of the novel. So it's a rather long novel. The story, as I told you before, comes with an author's note, and it is divided into 3 parts. The story itself, right? The story proper. The first part is titled The Silver of the Mine. Then the second part is titled The Isabels. And finally, we have The Lighthouse. The novel, very interestingly, is dedicated to John Galsworthy, who, as you may know, was a winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. So you can definitely expect more on him from me, just because of that. And after the dedication to John Galsworthy, we have a quote from King John, the play by Shakespeare. Not one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, really, but I think the quote is really good. So foul a sky clears not without a storm. It's very appropriate, of course, the way that epigraphs tend to be. So let me tell you a little bit now about the plot and the characters. What is it that you can find here in Nostromo? Nostromo is a story of revolt in Latin America, and it is set in the imaginary Republic of Costaguana. Now, the Republic of Costaguana, that name is rather unflattering, of course, but I would say that as a composite of nations in Hispanic America, it is really a very accurate one. I really like the depiction of Latin America in this novel, and I think it is true to history with its good things and its bad things, right? Now, the first part, the Silver of the Mine, introduces us to Charles Gould, okay? And he is the administrator of a silver mine that is located in the town of Sulaco. This silver mine had haunted Charles Gould's father, and now it haunts him. It's almost as if the silver mine had a mind of its own, a will of its own. It's basically a character in and of itself. Now, other important characters that we meet are, for example, Giorgio Viola. He is a romantic fighter who belonged to the ranks of Garibaldi, so he has a history of fighting. He's a freedom fighter. And we also get a glimpse of a man by the name of Gian Battista Fidanza, whom the locals call Nostromo. He is a longshoreman for the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company. And as in most narratives, what happens in this first part of Nostromo is that we get the story, the setting, and the problem. So this is a very traditional way of beginning the story. And it becomes clear to us that as the administrator of the mine, Charles Gould is the one who exercises power, not the local political authorities. Now, the situation obviously and inevitably and naturally causes resentment among the population. This is also part of Latin America and its history. In the second part, we move on to that. That one is titled The Isabels, as I told you before, and this is basically where the conflict actually takes shape, in the middle or the center part of the novel. It is concerned primarily with Antonia Avellanos. She is the daughter of one of Charles Gould's friends, and also the man who loves her, who is a journalist, and his name is Martin Decoux. Antonia is political. She really wants the best for the people of Sulaco. But if you look at Martin, on the other hand, he is the type of man who describes himself as being above all that, above all the politics and all the turmoil and all that. And as the situation worsens in Sulaco and the Republic of Costaguana, all that he wants is basically to leave that place with the woman he loves. So this is really where things get interesting in the novel, in this second part. So as Gould and the Coup realize that their interests are in danger, for Gould, of course, the interests are economic or material, and for the Coup, they are romantic. What they do is they devise a plan in order to protect those interests, and they enlist the help of Nostromo in order to do that, because he seems to be the only one who may be able or capable of carrying out their plan. Then after part 2, we get, of course, the final part, which is The Lighthouse, part 3. And what happens in this part, just following the traditional structure of a novel, is that we have the resolution of the conflict, and we also hear about the fates of the characters that we have met. Now let's talk a little bit about the main theme. Okay, because Nostromo is a great story. It's a good old-fashioned great story, but it is also a complex analysis of capitalist colonialism. So in that way, I guess you could read it as a text of sociology or of history too. Does that sound familiar? It's basically the same topic as Heart of Darkness, but in this case with Nostromo, Conrad is much more objective, and I would say a lot less ambiguous than he was in Heart of Darkness. So Latin America in Nostromo is shown as a very unstable region. But what I like about this novel is that it doesn't just show Latin America as a land of corruption. It is also a land of ideals, a land of self-sacrifice. And that's what I like about the portrayal of Latin America. As I told you before, it's quite objective. right? We don't have any type of Manichaeism here. It's like there's a place for both of these things, the corruption and also the idealism. So the people, when you look at the locals, they just want to be free and self-sufficient, but those in power basically sell the country to foreign interests in order to enrich themselves and to remain in power also. So revolution, when you consider all of these situations that are at the same time working together there, it just becomes inevitable. That's also part, unfortunately, of Latin American history. That's why I say Nostromo is really about the sad history of Latin America and about its eternal struggle. And I think that Conrad had a very clear perception of that. As I said before, this is not based on real life experience, whether he was in Latin America or not for a while, but it is based on a lot of reading. This was a very carefully researched novel. And if you ask me, I would say that Nostromo should be required reading for courses on Latin American history and Latin American politics. Now, that said, many critics have pointed out that the Latin America that you find in Nostromo is actually 19th century Poland in disguise. And looking at it that way, you could say that Conrad was actually much closer to home than he might seem at a superficial reading. But I think that says a lot about Nostromo as a novel also, because in other words, what we have here is one of those great novels that function both at the local and at the universal level. This is a global story in many ways. As I was reading it, I kept telling myself that maybe a better title for it would have been Sulaco, the name of the town, or maybe even the King of Sulaco, which is the way that the locals refer to Gould, who is in charge of the silver mine. Nostromo, the character, becomes important in the novel only in the second half. But when you get to that point, you realize why the novel bears the title of this character. Nostromo means our man. And then his last name, Fidanza, recalls the Italian verb affidanzarsi, which means to get or to become engaged. So we have highly symbolic names in this case. And just like Heart of Darkness, just like Lord Jim, and so many other stories by Conrad, Nostromo revolves around the figure of an imposing man. Okay, Conrad is usually criticized by the way that he depicts women. People say that in his novels the women are always beautiful, they are always pure. And I'm afraid that in the case of Nostromo, we really have more of the same when it comes to that. But at the same time, I would say that the character of Antonia, I found her to be memorable. I found her to be a very positive character. And for Conrad, at the biographical level, she was actually very dear because she was based on his first love. But let's go back to the figure of the man, right? Nostromo, the imposing male that is at the center of this text. Just like Lord Jim, Nostromo is a good man. Okay, we have a good man at the center of this novel. But you're not going to find in Nostromo, the novel, the type of technical imperfections that you will find in a novel like Lord Jim. The narrative techniques in Lord Jim can be probably groundbreaking and just a lot more daring than the ones in Nostromo, but Nostromo is really polished to perfection, I would say, and it is also much more socially and politically involved, and that is what makes it to me a superior text, at least when we consider it in comparison to Lord Jim. Another thing that I like about Nostromo is that in this novel Conrad shows his understanding of both locals and foreigners. This is the part where I want to share some quotes with you, and the first one that I have is by Decoux, and you can find it on page 189 of this particular edition that I have. So Decoux says, "There is a curse of futility upon our character. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, chivalry and materialism, high-sounding sentiments, and the supine morality, violent efforts for an idea, and the sullen acquiescence in every form of corruption. We convulsed a continent for our independence only to become the passive prey of a democratic parody, the helpless victims of scoundrels and cutthroats, our institutions a mockery, our laws a farce." There are pages and years of Latin American history summarized into that statement right there by Decoux. And the same character, a little bit later on, to show you how he talks about foreigners in the Republic of Costaguana. This is on page 237. He describes the character of Charles Gould as an Englishman, which to him, what that means is that Gould, quote, simply cannot act or exist without idealizing every simple feeling, desire, or achievement. He could not believe his own motives if he did not make them first part of some fairy tale. And you know what I thought about when I read that little statement about how he describes the Englishman, Charles Gould? What came to mind was the title character from Graham Greene's The Quiet American. That's just the thought that I had as I was reading that. And then another passage that I loved, which is on page 454. This is also, actually no, this is not by the coup. 454. This is by Charles Gould. Okay, so we switch the speaker right here. And he says, the words one knows so well have a nightmarish meaning in this country. Liberty, democracy, patriotism, government, all of them have a flavor of folly and murder. This is where you can see the difference between the two cultures. Okay, the two cultures have the same words, they have the same concepts, but they are actually worlds apart and irreconcilable. So I want to make one final comment. Okay, as I read Nostromo, I got the feeling that the real protagonist of this story was not Gould, it was not Gianbattista, it was not the coup or anybody else basically, but actually the silver itself. And I thought that that made perfect sense if we are looking about a novel that deals with the workings of capitalism. So that's just a thought on that. And then regarding the issue of revolution, right? This is one of the central themes of the novel. Conrad did not exhaust that here because actually his next two novels were also about the same topic. One of them was The Secret Agent. I cannot show you a copy of that because, believe it or not, The Secret Agent was the first novel that I read on a Kindle. And then the other one that he wrote. So these are his two next novels, The Secret Agent and Under Western Ice. This was the first actual novel that I read by Conrad. My first text by him was Heart of Darkness, a novella, and the first novel that I read by him, which is kind of weird, right, was Under Western Ice. Both of them, The Secret Agent and Under Western Ice, are excellent, and I recommend both of them. The Secret Agent probably a little bit better than Under Western Ice. So, the bottom line, let me tell you this, I really agree with the consensus. I think that Nostromo is Joseph Conrad's literary masterpiece. It represents the highest expression of his narrative art. I think the story, the topic, the themes, the tone, everything is just superb right here. And of course, Nostromo is a landmark of English literature. But another thing that I like about it is that it prefigures the work of so many key and brilliant Latin American authors. I'm thinking of Miguel Ángel Asturias or of Alejo Carpentier. And of course, I am thinking of Gabriel García Márquez. As you may remember, Conrad himself makes a cameo appearance in what novel by Gabriel García Márquez? Absolutely. Love in the Times of Cholera. If I'm not mistaken, it takes place towards the end of that text. You have a cameo appearance by Conrad himself. Now, I also wanted to recommend something to you. There's a really nice resource that I have, which is the Oxford Reader's Companion to Conrad. This is something that I bought at Half Price Books many years ago, so the cover may look a little bit different today, but it is just packed with useful information about all of his works and about his life, and it's not very long either. This is the kind of thing that you can basically manage. It's just good enough, not too much and not too little. So if you're interested in Conrad or want to learn more about him, I recommend that you use this as a companion in your reading. And then the other thing that I wanted to say was this, what is going to be my next step when it comes to my reading of Conrad. It's going to be this one right here, Victory, An Island Tale. I have had this book for ages. Okay, I got this, I can't remember if it was for my birthday or for Christmas, but we are talking years and years ago, so this is, a long overdue reading for me. So it's the next one that I'm going to explore, and I will definitely share my ideas with you on that when that happens. So do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. I'm always happy to hear them. Those were my 2 cents on Joseph Conrad's masterpiece, Nostromo. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.